Okay, Michele, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning everyone. I mean everyone in the US. Good afternoon everyone in Europe. A good night to Simon or other people who attend from Australia. So this is a joint project with Alessandro and Fiona. I'm Michele. I'm a postdoc at the Yale Center for Algorithm, Data and Market Design at Yale. And I was a student at ESC until like 7 months ago. So we all know that digital platforms collect personal data and monetize it by selling targeted ads. Now, when it comes to personal data, consumers are not all the same. There are at least two very important dimensions of heterogeneity. One is privacy evaluation. Different people may care to a different extent that their data is being collected and shared with third parties. Another dimension is sophistication about data practices. People may have different degrees to which they are aware of what the platform is doing with their data. So given these two dimensions of heterogeneity, the platform can optimally screen consumers. And indeed, in recent years, we have seen an increasingly adoption of these payer consent models. So for instance, we have seen this Meta subscription service in the European Union. Meta will be our leading example, but similar platforms also offer similar menu pricing schemes, such as YouTube Premium and TikTok ad-free tiers. Now, when platforms design their privacy policies and their menu, they are subject to a whole body of regulation, at least in Europe. We both have the GDPR, and for digital gatekeepers, we also have the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act. So what we are doing in this paper is to try to answer the following questions. So first of all, how do platforms optimally design their menu of price and privacy policies? Does the optimal design depend on the extent of user sophistication? So on how many consumers are really aware of the privacy losses they incur by subscribing to the platform? And third, we introduce a regulation. And so we ask how do regulatory constraints affect the platform menu choices? And in addressing this question, we will be explicitly modeling the regulatory constraints imposed by the European regulation. Okay, let me jump straight into the model. So we have a pretty standard screening environment. So we have a platform that offers, it's a monopolist and offers a service quality, V. So each consumer going on the platform can enjoy this value V from connecting with their own friends, for instance, on Facebook. Now, in exchange for this service, the platform will collect some amount, capital D, of data. And for each unit of data, the platform gets a unit revenue alpha. So this is in reduced form what the platform gets from selling data to advertisers. And the platform can charge also an access price, and we allow both for positive or negative prices. Now, when you think about negative prices, you can think about something slightly more sophisticated that giving money to people, because we know that there may be arbitrage by bots, but let's assume that the platform can offer, for instance, an Amazon gift card only to a consumer who can verify its own identity. So we allow for negative prices in this model. Coming to the consumer side, as I was explaining at the beginning, consumer derive a loss from giving data to the platform. So the idea is that when data collection increases, consumers face a convex disutility from sharing data. And for simplicity, but without really any loss of insights, we consider a quadratic specification. And so we can define a net service quality as the difference between the baseline service quality, V, and the loss from sharing data. So this object can be either positive or negative. So we allow the technology of the platform to be able to extract so much data that overall the consumer will have a negative utility from accessing the platform. And in this case, it will still access the platform provided that the platform compensates through a negative subscription price. Okay? So quite intuitively, these are the payoffs. So for each consumer on the platform gains alpha times the amount of data collection plus the transfer, and the consumer gets theta times the net quality minus the transfer, where theta, as usual, is the consumer marginal valuation for quality. Now, we are interested in screening model, so we assume that this theta is consumer private information. It has a commonly known distribution, smooth distribution over some support, and we make the standard assumptions that ensure that the screening models, both alla Baron and Meyerson and alla Mussen-Rosen, admit smooth, fully separating solutions. So what we are going to do is to first show how a canonical screening model, because this is really Mussen-Rosen with the caveat that quality can become negative and so also the access price can be negative, how this simple screening problem rationalizes these payer consent models in particular by Facebook. And then we will add in the picture the regulator. And so we will assume that the regulator can impose a hard cap on data collection, which I will argue is consistent with the DSA, or can impose the platform to offer an equivalent, less personalized option, which is consistent with DMA regulation. And after the regulator sets these constraints, we will show how the platform design choice is affected. Let me mention that this is highly policy relevant as of today because the meta payer consent model has been deemed non-compliant with this European regulation by the Commission over the summer. And more recently, in December, Meta has committed to release a new menu which takes into account especially this equivalent service alternative constraint. And we are still waiting for Meta to release this new menu. They committed to do it by the end of January, but as of today, February 5, for those who follow later online, we don't have this new menu yet. So this is still an ongoing topic. Now, as usual, let me start with the complete information benchmark. So under complete information, we have this very nice, smooth
Sorry,
decreasing.
Michele, can I
Yes.
interrupt? There's a question which would be interesting to ask now.
Mhm,
What would be different, Martin Pites asks,
mhm.
if we consider ad volume instead of data?
That's a very good point. So in the model that I show so far, really nothing would change. But when we
Okay.
add the naive consumers, we will see that it's natural to think that a naive consumer doesn't understand what's going on with the data he shares, rather than this is a guy who doesn't understand that advertising are a nuisance when going through the social media. So I would say it's a slightly more natural interpretation,
Hmm.
the privacy loss, and will be like what we are concerned about when we go to regulation. But for the positive side, especially this baseline model where all consumers are aware of what's going on, you can say it's exactly, you can apply exactly the same to the interpreting D as the loss from you viewing more advertising messages when you are on the platform.
Okay. And another question then,
Mhm,
while we are kind of at the model discussion, from Greg Taylor, is it
mhm.
important that the same theta multiplies V and D squared? It seems to amount to an assumption that consumers' value for content and privacy is perfectly correlated.
Yes, so
So,
this is something that often comes up. So the next time I will spend some time before before getting this question. So the idea is that so first of all, having a two-dimensional screening problem, we know that in general is very hard to solve. So let me be honest. For tractability, we need to have only one variable type. Now, we can argue that even in any quality screening model, product quality is an aggregate of multiple attributes, no? So the
Hmm.
quality of a good comes up from summing up the attributes of this good. And here we can say that there are two attributes. One is an aggregate of how good is Facebook, and another one is privacy. And so
Hmm.
this is really the same assumption that Musa Rosen is making. On the other hand, we can have a model where theta multiplies only d squared. What we don't like about that model is that it always generates this under exchange of data. So this there will be over privacy provision for all sophisticated consumers, which we don't believe is consistent with what we observed. But let's say the main trade-offs between naive and sophisticated consumers will keep going also in a model in which theta only multiplies this privacy loss term.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, let me move on. So this is what we get under complete information. And as you would expect, the higher is theta, given that the V, the baseline quality is fixed, the higher is theta, the more you care about privacy, the less data the platform will collect. So the more privacy you will get. And so we have two regions. We have a region of low theta types who are paid for sharing their data. So these guys care little about privacy, so they get negative net quality, and so they get a subsidy to access the platform. On the other hand, we have high theta guys. These guys pay for privacy. They have a high valuation for privacy. They will get a service which is quite private with positive net utility, and so they will have to pay to access the platform. Given that here the platform knows everything and so can extract the whole willingness to pay through the transfer. Now, when we move to incomplete information, we get something which is much more interesting. So we get that rather than one smooth separating solution, we get three different regions. So we get a pooling region in the middle, where consumers get zero net quality. So this is the value of data extraction such that your net quality is zero. And so your price will be also zero. And then we get a region of low types where we have too little data collection, because you can say that because of incomplete information, you will have to pay this rent. And because of the rent, the data collection is inefficiently low. And this is the kind of virtual value that you get in the sellers model, in the Barrow-Myerson setup. So this guy behave like sellers, and so they undertrade data. On the other side of the spectrum, we have instead the virtual value that comes from Musa-Rosen models. So the idea is that these guys, they behave like buyers, and so they undertrade privacy. That means that they overshare their personal data. So let me show this through a picture, which I think makes things much easier and more intuitive. So this was the dashed line was the solution under complete information. And here we get instead the screening solution. So again, we can identify these three regions. What happens here is that low types, they don't care too much about privacy. They are willing to share a lot in order to be paid from the platform. So essentially what they are doing is that they are selling their data to the platform. But when you are a seller, what you want to do is that you want to understate um, you want to overstate the value from selling. You want to claim that your data is valued a lot to you. So to prevent this mimicking behavior, what the platform will optimally do is to distort downward the the amount of data trading with higher types, and and so we get under trading of data relative to the complete information solution. On the opposite end of the distribution of theta, we get guys who care a lot about privacy. So these guys want to buy privacy from the platform. They want a service with a positive net quality because they want a quite private service. Now, given that these guys want to buy privacy, their incentive is to understate their type, to understate how much their value they are willing to pay for privacy. Now, because of this, in an incentive compatible mechanism, the platform optimally increases the amount of data collection. That is, it reduces the amount of privacy. Now, we have these two opposing forces. The most efficient way for the platform to take them both on board is to introduce a positive measure of types which are bunched into a pooling option. As I said before, this pooling option is a zero net quality option. So these guys here are indifferent between participating or not on the platform, and accordingly, the optimal access price is zero. So the picture we get is extremely rich, and it's actually richer than the current platform model, and not at all, not entirely consistent with the current platform model. So we get this nice feature that a positive measure of types are bunched into a free option, which is what's going on Facebook. We get this positive price option, which Facebook is introducing, but we don't see negative prices on Facebook. And we also see on Facebook instead an option which is also free, but is more data intense, data invasive. And this is actually what Facebook offers as its default option. So we see that this is a nice model, but so far we don't get a perfect um, mirroring of the Facebook Meta payer consent model. What is nice about this model is that we start from Husserl-Rosen, we relax, we abandon this non-negativity constraint on quality and prices, and we get a solution that resembles the countervailing incentive solution because of these two different incentives that we were discussing. Okay, this is what I explained in words. Now, let me add consumer naivety. So when we derived this model, we said, okay, we need something more to explain what Facebook is doing. And we thought that as a natural addition to the model is to add a bunch of people who are not aware about their privacy losses. So the simplest way to model these naive people is to assume that a fraction of consumers act as if their theta was zero. So they are not responsive at all to service quality. Now, for instance, you may think that these people don't bother to read the privacy policies, but they realize somehow that the platform is not a non-for-profit. So they realize that overall, going to the platform means that the platform should gain from them. So these people act as if they don't understand what's going on, but act as if their net quality from accessing the platform was zero. So this assumption implies that these people are willing to share all their data for free. So we impose the upper bar, which is a technological constraint on how much data the platform can extract from any user. So what these people will do is when confronted to Facebook menu, they will pick the cheapest option because for them, the only thing that differentiates among offers is the transfer because they don't understand what quality is. Okay, and we allow for this sophistication type to be correlated with the underlying type theta in the sense that we assume that the distribution of theta for naive consumer is potentially different than for sophisticated consumer. This will be only relevant when we move into welfare and into regulation, but the way you can think about this model now is that we have the same population of consumer as before, and we have a mass of consumer with theta equal to zero. This is only the only thing that changes in this menu screening analysis. Now, what's the impact for the platform of having these naive consumers in the market? Well, if the platform could tell apart the sophistication type, anytime that a naive consumer comes in, it will offer a data exploitative option, so it will collect all the data and will not remunerate at all the consumer. So these guys, again, are willing to share all the data for free. So when you see a guy like this coming, you can extract all the data without paying this guy anything. Now, what happens instead under asymmetric information? If you cannot tell this guy apart from the sophisticated types. You have to offer this overall incentive compatible menu. When you offer a menu with negative prices, like the one that would prevail in equilibrium without naive consumers, then all the naive consumers will go for this negative price option. So anytime you want to collect more data from low theta types, and in order to do so, you need to pay them, you will need to correspondingly pay also all the naive consumers, which is something that is costly for you because you can get all this data from the naive guys without paying them anything. So the presence of naive consumer introduces an incentive to reduce or even eliminate this compensation for data. So formally, what happens is that nothing changes over the region of theta to which you offer zero or positive prices because the naive consumer won't be tempted to go here. But what happens is that you inefficiently distort downward the data policy vis-à-vis the low theta sophisticated types in order to limit payments to the naive. And of course, whenever you offer a menu like this to the sophisticated types, the lowest transfer will be the transfer you offer to the highest data policy, which is the data policy you offer to the theta lower bar. And then you add an option which prescribes instead maximal data collection for the same transfer. You make it slightly more prominent in order for the naive guys to go there. And so this is what you get from the naive consumers. Again, let me show you through a picture. So what the platform does is starting from this menu that you do offer in the case where gamma is equal to 0, it will inefficiently reduce data collection from this theta lower bar because reducing data collection from theta lower bar means reducing the transfer the platform has to pay to theta lower bar. And this is the same transfer that the platform will have to pay to the naive consumer. Now, of course, by monotonicity, once you reduce the data collection for theta lower bar, the optimal thing you can do is to bunch at this inefficiently low level also larger types here. So we get a further bunching region. And so this is what the platform would do. But here, the platform still pays a transfer to the naive consumer. So it's optimal to do so as long as gamma is not too large. When instead there are literally too many of these naive consumers in the market, what the platform wants to do is completely shut down negative price options. So here, there are so many naive consumers that it's not worth paying them in order to realize gains from trade with the screening of the low theta sophisticated consumers. And so the platform completely forgoes these negative price options in order to maximally extract data from the naive without paying them any transfer. So we argue that this is what Facebook is currently doing in Europe. So we have three three option menu by Facebook in Europe. We have a free default option with high data collection. So if you go on Facebook and you just say click yes or okay to the first screen, you are defaulted into this D overline 0. So into this free option which extracts a lot of data. This will be the option that Facebook intends for the naive users. Now, if you are not naive, you are willing to pay the switching cost to go through the settings, you can get also for free a much more private version of Facebook. So you go into the settings, and I'm not a Facebook user, but this is what Fiona told me. Um, it takes some time, but you can get a more private option again for free, and this will correspond to this free option designed for sophisticated types. And then Facebook has also introduced some positive price option in its menu. So once we have sufficiently many naive consumers in the market, we can rationalize what Facebook is doing. In particular, the fact that Facebook is offering two free options with different degrees of privacy levels and is not offering negative price options. Okay, so then what we say is to take this menu as a good description of what's going on and introduce on top of this problem the regulatory constraints coming from the European laws. So,
Sorry, before
mhm,
we go to regulatory constraints,
mhm.
that's one question from Martin Pies on kind of alternative assumption. So, what would happen if a naive consumer is a consumer who always expects D equal to zero?
Was expected equal to zero. So what would happen is that the platform could extract positive payments from these guys and
Hmm.
extract all their data. So these guys become even more profitable to the platform. So if there are not too many naive consumers, what I said remains true because still the platform doesn't want to forgo trade with all these people to get payments from the naives. Because here you can still have all the sophisticates on board so long as you offer this free option. But you can do even better with the naives in the Martin proposed specification. So if the naives not only are willing to share all the data with you, but are also willing to pay to access Facebook, which is something that actually seems at odds with empirical evidence, um, then the platform could even shut down a lot of sophisticated consumers only to focus on naives and get paid by the naives. I think this is what's
Hmm.
going on.
Okay.
Okay, let me move into regulation. So what we model is the regulatory constraint imposed by the DSA and the DMA. So what the DSA says is that advertising cannot be based on sensitive data, such as religious beliefs, political beliefs, health status, so on and so forth. So there are categories of data that the platform cannot collect. And we model this by introducing an hard cap on data collection. So rather than going up to the upper bar, the platform is constrained to trade at most D1 data from any consumer. And so intuitively, this will be a constraint that will help protecting naive consumer from this data exploitation. On the other hand, we have the Digital Markets Act that requires this equivalent, less personalized option. Equivalent means free because also the default option is free. So equivalent means free and means that it should come at the same baseline service quality level. So this is quite important. We have this is explicitly stated in this recital 37. So this more personal, this less personalized alternative should come at the same baseline service quality level. So what the DMA is requiring is a privacy enhancing default. So the platform must offer this option, must offer for free an option with data collection D0, and this D0 should be less than what the platform currently offers for free, even to the sophisticated people who go through the settings. Okay? So what we do next in the paper is to first consider separately the impact of a hard cap through the DSA enforcement and of a default regulation through the DMA enforcement. And then we will combine both approaches. We will show that the two forms of regulation can be complementary, and we derive the optimal regulatory options. Now, let me briefly mention that both instruments also require GDPR compliant consent. So we know that it's hard to enforce in practice that people really know what they are doing. So we still assume in the baseline analysis and we relax this in the extensions that a fraction of consumers is naive, so you can get their consent to data collection even without them properly understanding what they are trading. Okay, let me move into hard cap regulation. Well, here the impact is quite straightforward. So when you cannot collect more than D1 data from any consumer, what you simply do is to keep your menu unchanged when this constraint doesn't bind and to cap the data collection at the binding constraint. So this is what you would get if the constraint is also only binding for the naive consumers, you don't change at all your menu with the sophisticates. But if the hard cap constraint also binds for some low type theta sophisticated consumer, what you will do is that you simply cap your original menu to respect this constraint. And of course, this is inefficient for this segment of consumers because remember that these guys were already trading too little data because of this countervailing incentive that I explained at the beginning. And hard cap is great to protect naive consumer from exploitation because now you can essentially specify by regulation which is the data collection that you want naive users to get, but it's not that great in the segment of consumer which are sophisticated because you are reducing the extent of mutually beneficial data trade between sophisticated users and the platform. Okay? Now, what happens instead if we introduce a free default option following this DMA regulation? Well, what happens is that the platform before regulation was offering square root of 2v for free. Now the platform is constrained to collect less data for free. And so this implies that the position of this bunching region of these free types shifts to the right. This option is more private, so it's more appealing to people who value privacy more. So let me show you through this picture. Suppose that we start from the menu that is the current meta menu with no negative price option. This was the original free option. What the default regulation does is to reduce the amount of data collection in the free option. So accordingly, the bunching region shifts here, so shifts to the right. But interesting, what can happen is that the platform then finds it optimal to introduce some negative price option. So the idea is that um, you can say this form of regulation will trade off good privacy increases for consumers here. So these are consumers who are getting too little privacy. And so this regulation helps them to get more privacy, which increases also total welfare. But on the other hand, you will get fewer data collection here. And this is bad because these consumers were already trading too little data. But actually, this instrument is not that bad because the extent of inefficiency in this low theta region can be quite limited. And the idea is that once you force the platform to collect too little data for free, here in the low theta region, there is a lot of gains from trade for trading more data with these low theta types. And so accordingly, the platform may find it optimal to introduce negative price options. So once you can collect fewer data for free, you can be willing to pay more to pay consumers to get more data. So we expect that if there are not too many naive consumers in the market, because of course, if gamma is very large, you don't want to pay anybody anyway. But if consumer naivety is not a too serious issue, this kind of regulation may improve overall efficiency in the segment of sophisticated consumers because you can get efficiently more privacy here without sacrificing too much privacy data collection here. Now, however, if we only have this default regulation, what happens is that the platform will still be able to get the naive consumer towards this data exploitative policy here. And the idea is quite simple. Once you should offer this as the default, you could offer a tiny incentive for naive consumer to move again towards a data exploitative option. But even though we still get data exploitation, at least now these consumers can receive a positive compensation for their data. Because once the platform under regulation introduces this negative priced option, then also the naive will take this negative price option, so at least they get somewhat compensated for sharing their data. But the best we can do is to combine both forms of regulation. So DMA and DSA are really two complementary forms of regulation. Because we can use the hard cap to protect the naive consumer from data exploitation, and we can use together the privacy enhancing default to improve the efficiency of data trade for sophisticated consumers. So what we do in the last section of our baseline analysis is to determine the jointly optimal regulation of hard cap and default option. And what we find is that once again, understanding how much naivety there is in the market is crucial. So if we have few naive consumers in the market, then you don't want to distort too much trade with the low theta sophisticates. And so you set the cap quite loose. So you set the hard cap not too small because you don't want to destroy too much surplus with the low theta sophisticated consumer. But then you set a quite strict default because this allows you to efficiently increase privacy for the high theta, and we don't have too much of a problem in the left part of the distribution, as I was explaining before. But when instead we have a lot of naive consumers in the market, then the platform has no incentive to offer negative price option anyways. And so the best thing the platform can do is to set a unified standard. So to set a default which is equal to the cap. So only hard cap regulation here becomes sufficient. And the more the naive consumer in the market, the more you want to protect these people, the more stringent should be regulation in this case. Now, let me go to conclusions. So on the positive side, we have seen that we can expect rich data markets because of these countervailing incentives. We have consumer who cares a lot about their privacy, who understate to pay less for privacy. Consumer who care little about privacy, who overstate their types to get higher payments. And we get, as a result, this bunching region where consumer access the platform for free. This is what we would obtain in a setting where everyone was aware of what's going on. However, when there is a lot of consumer naivety in the market, this naivety will destroy some of these data markets. So in particular, the platform will not be willing to introduce negative price options so as to save money vis-a-vis the naives. And so we get that because of consumer naivety, we get under trade of data with the low theta sophisticated consumers. How to address this market failure? Well, we explored the impact of the regulatory constraints imposed by the European regulation. We have seen that we can use hard cap regulation to protect naive consumers from exploitation. We can use default regulation to restore more efficient data trade for sophisticated consumers. But we have seen that again, when there is too much consumer naivete in the market, the best regulation is actually quite simple, is to impose a uniform, strict privacy floor. One other point that we make in the paper is that for regulation to have a bite, the regulation should come with this non-quality degradation constraint. So one thing that Facebook seems to be currently doing is that when it offers less personalized alternatives, it tends to have unskippable ads. So you can get this more private option, but if you accept that the ads will be larger and will be impossible to skip for a while on your screen. And we argue that this may be a way actually not to comply, but to escape regulation, because once you introduce an option which is more private, but has a lower baseline service quality, no one will go for this option. And so we should be careful of imposing this no quality degradation constraint in order for regulation to be effective. And finally, one last point that we make is that in the laissez-faire regime, platforms gain a lot from naive users because they can extract a lot of data for free. Once we implement effective regulation, the platform gains more in expectation from a sophisticated consumer. Because now, with the sophisticated consumer, it can move away from the default option and exploit these mutually beneficial data trade options. So what we argue is that in a world where the extent of consumer naivety also depends on platform features, platform design choices, a good effect of regulation would be to give incentive to the platform to educate more consumers. So once the platform is told by the regulator, the default option is not that great, you don't make too much money out of it, then the platform would have incentive to turn naive users who would take this default option into sophisticated users with which a more efficient data trade arrangement can be obtained. And with this, I think I close my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. You're perfect on time. Excellent. So now we give the floor to Simon, who is free to make any comments he care to do. And Simon, you have 5 minutes. You can go a little bit over time. It's
Yeah,
okay.
thank you very much. Thank you, Michele, for a great presentation and a very clear presentation and a very nice paper. I got, well, two sets of comments. And, the nice thing about this format is I don't have to summarize the paper and I can give just some high-level philosophical views on these things. But on a kind of a slightly more technical level or micro level, one thing that comes to mind or that I think requires a little bit more emphasis is what kind of data are we talking about here? What kind of data is it that the consumer can actually sell to the platform? And are these the data that are the first order issue when you care about privacy protection, etc.? And what I have in mind is that you have consumers who get negative consumption utility from the platform. And so that to me suggests that this is not information that is generated by the consumer and the platform or by the consumer interacting with the platform, but it's information that the consumer must have before he joins the platform. So it's kind of personal data, your age, gender, and what have you. And it's not something that you reveal to yourself, or the platform jointly with you reveals to yourself and the platform, which are your taste preferences about what kind of music do you like, or what kind of movies do you like, etc., or what kind of songs do you like. So I think this thing, because if it's, if I get negative consumption utility and I still need to consume the good, that it's very hard to see how this is gonna work. And then somewhat related and seemingly unrelated, but I think there would be a fix to address both of these. Is I think the idea that we need to protect privacy at all costs and giving up some of our privacy is just detrimental to us, is at odds with reality. So I think we get a lot of utility from Google Maps and Google Search and Spotify, and Waldvogel talks of the golden age of entertainment, etc., which comes about platforms and content providers knowing more precisely what consumers' preferences are. So the content that is being provided is better tailored to the consumers, better matched. And even if it's the same content, but if it's better matched because they know more about me, I'm better off. So one way this could be fixed within the model is, rather than assuming that utility derived from data is just minus d squared, it could be d plus minus a half d squared, or you could have a positive component that releasing some of your data is actually beneficial to you as well. And if you did that, then maybe everybody would get a positive. I don't know. I haven't solved the model, but maybe everybody would get a positive utility, and you wouldn't get this. Then you could have it as data that is being generated by interacting with or on the platform. Okay, so that was that on the on the data and the privacy, and then the kind of the deeper philosophical question is, well, it's a very concurrent issue, right? Policymakers care a lot about it, etc. But are we a little bit blinded by the things that are so novel in the digital age? And shouldn't we be focusing more on the kind of the old brick and mortar issues, which I would think here are public health, TikTok videos are simply addictive, and that doesn't require that they have any information about me. They're just made in such a way that you can't stay away. So this is maybe a bit thinking about tobacco in the 20th century. And the other thing is abuse of dominance, right? So Facebook started as a social network, or you can stay tuned with your friends, etc. But now it's all just about algorithms that try in a similar way to keep you on the platform. So that was sort of the cheap but kind of deeper issue that I think we should draw our attention to a little bit more.